Well, thank you so much. This has clearly been an extraordinary day of extraordinary women, and we're not going to let you down because our next panel is all about the art of negotiation and the power of turning no into yes. And as we've seen with all successful women, there is no formula for success. There's no roadmap. So I want to introduce these three ladies. I'm actually going to let you all introduce yourselves and really give your career story, because before we understand the obstacles that you faced, it would be a great idea to give us, what's your story? How did you get where you are? You want to start?
Hi, I'm Neera Tanden. I'm the president of the Center for American Progress, which is a think tank in Washington. My trajectory is a little bit more in the politics and government phase. I graduated from law school in the mid-90s and then immediately went into the White House working for then First Lady Hillary Clinton. I followed her here to New York when she ran for Senate and became her issues director. Then a few years later, came back to DC, helped start the Center for American Progress, and then worked for her in the Senate on her presidential campaign, and then moved over to President Obama and came back to CAP a few years ago. So that's my history in a nutshell. For most of my history, I had a woman boss, and I found it easier to negotiate with a woman boss personally. But I look forward to hearing everyone's take on that.
Perfect. Beth Swofford, your partner at CAA. If you can just set the stage for us, how you ended up here on this couch with us today, your story.
I went to film school at USC and studied to be a director, and then along the way I realized I'd be better off on the other side of on the more of the business side. So I'm sort of a diplomat between two worlds, between the artists and the people who make and distribute their work. So I represent mainly directors, a few actors, some writers, and I basically manage their careers. I help get their movies made. I make their deals. I'm kind of their consigliere, for the lack of a better term. And I live between New York and LA, but mainly New York. And I got here because I'm a really good friend of Dee Poku's, and I wanted to see what this is all about.
Noreena Hertz, I know you're in New York because your newest book is out, but being an author is just one of the many things you've done, so tell us your story.
Yes, I am an economics professor. I've just moved from Cambridge University in England to University College London. My area of expertise is decision making. When I'm not doing academic research, I advise CEOs of big companies, prime ministers and presidents. The real world negotiations I've been involved in stem from the Middle East peace process to Tanzania's renegotiations with the IMF on its debt, to the UK's economic kind of negotiations recently around in our recession that we've just come out of. So, but what I hope that I'll get a chance to share with you are some of the insights from my new book, Eyes Wide Open, which is coming out here next week, because there's a lot in it that I think is very germane to negotiating that may be kind of counterintuitive and surprising.
Beth, you negotiate for a living, but you're negotiating on behalf of other people. Talk about the differences between negotiating for others and what it's like for you to fight for yourself.
It's a lot easier because it's very easy to be an advocate for someone else and to get full of, and to get to be emotional without being too emotional when it's on behalf of someone else, because you're fighting for what somebody deserves and wants. And film directors and movie stars usually have been doing it for long enough. The people I work with have, at least. So they have a really clear idea of what they want. And that's very easy, because once you make a decision or you advise somebody, this is what you should be doing, and you're trying to do something, you're trying to pull off a movie or a TV show or whatever, then it becomes about what somebody needs in order to do their best work. So, I've been doing it for long enough too that I find it really relaxing, because I also can jump ahead, and it's fun because by the time you've gotten to a negotiation stage, that means something is going to happen. Because so much of my job is about combating inertia and trying to will things into being, or getting people.
Hold on, so much is about combating inertia?
Yeah.
How?
Because movies cost a lot of money to make, and it's a lot easier to say no than yes. So by the time I'm making a deal, almost the hardest part is done, which is what should get made, what's good, what's the kind of alchemy involved between somebody who's a creative person, matching them with a story or with a team behind them, or it can be a script or a book or someone's idea. So a lot of times my hardest part of my job is talking my clients into saying yes. And then it becomes a provisional yes. Yes, if I can get this and this, or yes, if the planets sort of line up, I suppose. And that to me that's the hardest part, is because you're asking people to spend a year and a half of their lives minimum to dedicate everything in their being to making something happen. So to negotiate for myself is, I almost have to act as though, I almost have to step aside and treat myself like a client, or I'll ask a friend, say, what do you think's fair in this situation? So I don't know if that's a good answer to the question, but it's, if I treat myself like my own best client, I'm in a lot better shape, because I represent other people better than I represent myself, probably.
Noreena, is there a point where we as women realize we have to negotiate? Because it often feels unfair to have to fight for yourself. When you're a student, you get your head around the fact, if I work hard, if I study, I will get that A. There's no negotiating involved, nothing's gray, nothing's unclear. But in the real world, if you have your head down and your mouth shut and you're doing your job, it's not enough. Because you're not looking to the right and the left, you don't necessarily get that extraordinary opportunity. How do great women get their head around the fact that you're not going to get ahead unless you're fighting, unless you're negotiating, because other people around you are always doing it?
Yeah, I mean, the research is really clear on this point. Women, there was a study done at Stanford of MBA students, and it showed that men graduating were being paid on average 7% more than women. When they investigated why that was, it was precisely because the women were not negotiating. 57% of the men were actively negotiating when they got their job offer, whereas the women, tended not to. So it's absolutely essential that women, truly expect to be paid as much, more, I might even argue, than their male colleagues. And absolutely essential, because if you're not demanding it, then no one's going to give it to you, even if you were the A student, even if you have got an amazing CV. Yes, it's really essential.
Neera, I want to talk about politics, because what so many of us hate is that our work environments are political. You are truly in politics, not metaphorically in politics. Does it kill you? Does it kill you that there are people around you that aren't necessarily doing their day job, but all they're doing is politicking? And for many people, politicking is what gets them ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's it's a tough line between politicking and networking. Like, networking is what people do all the time, and it's acceptable. Then playing politics in the office or outside is a little bit more negative. I also wanted to just address something that was mentioned, which is that women don't negotiate. And I think we should recognize it's not that women don't negotiate because they're being stupid or they're just not thinking about it. I think one of the reasons why women don't negotiate is because there are cultural consequences. And what I mean by that is women who act as aggressively as men in the workplace are often penalized in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. And so I think how that translates is women will take the first offer because they think, many kinds of women who are future CEOs will take that first offer because they think if they get a reputation for being difficult, it will penalize them. And we all know, it's a very common understanding that men and women can act very similarly, and the woman is considered, for lack of a better word, a bitch, and the man is not. And there's a very famous example of this in Sheryl Sandberg's book, which is, there's a famous case study at Harvard Business School that they use in which there's a woman entrepreneur whose name is Heidi, and they basically study the case of her entrepreneurship, and then they just literally change the gender and make her Howard, and the students respond, they basically believe Howard is a great leader, and Heidi is kind of selfish and out for herself. So I think one of the tips that I've used when I've been negotiating is to talk about, my role within the organization, how it's important, essentially what I'm contributing to the organization itself, so that it's not really like about me and my ambition. Now, I wish I could just say the same things a man says and get the same raise. And now that I'm head of an organization, I really watch for these cues myself. But I think that it's important for us to recognize that women aren't just deciding to make these choices because they're not thinking about it straight. They're actually reacting pretty well to the cues that they're sent. And we have to make sure that we change the conversation, change those cues so women can act just like men do.
How?
And still do well. Well, I think, my own view of this is that it's important for us to get more women leaders. That's the bottom line.
How does a woman, we love saying that, we need more women leaders, we need them to be in powerful positions. Girls certainly want those jobs. They're not saying, nope, don't give me the big job. What is standing in the way of women getting there? And Beth, I want you to answer this, because do you think wouldn't it be great if everybody had an agent in life? People would love to have one personally, professionally, someone else saying that we're great, we're smart, we're beautiful, we're talented. Not everybody can have an agent, but is there a way to have a faux agent? Is there a way, we talk so much about mentors and sponsors, is there a way to get that sponsor of yours, to get that mentor of yours, not to just help you in a direct relationship? Could they be your advocate? Could they be your agent?
Well, I think if we're going back to the idea of what an agent does in whatever way, it's getting the best out of people. It's is this person in this job or in this circumstance, will they shine or not? Will they grow? Will they be encouraged to take risks? And are they just genuinely good at it? So I think a lot of it is matchmaking your own skill set with whatever you choose to do. And I think going back to what you were saying before about why women don't get ahead, I think so much of it is combating the good girl thing. So, I know it's because generally high achieving women also feel like I've seen be more conservative in a way, and maybe less likely to rock the boat. And I know anytime I've gotten out of the good girl mentality, I've succeeded so much more than when I was really worried about having everybody like me. And it's not as though by doing that you're not well liked. It's to speak your mind. I think that so much of it is not being a good girl.
But is that because deep inside there's not just the good girl, there's a little girl who says, I'm afraid to have enemies. I'm afraid they're just going to send me on my way.
Yes. I mean, I had that early in my career because I was doing well and I was signing a lot of people, and I got a lot of flack from actually more women than men within that I was out for myself too much, or that I only wanted to be with the guys, or I thought, no, it's because you're all sitting together in like your little version of a sewing circle, gossiping and not getting out there and actually bringing in business. So I had to get over that a little bit because I was at a new company and I wanted all the women to like me, but at a certain point I had to set that aside because I realized that was also it was a little bit of ganging up on the new girl too. So
doesn't that break your heart?
Well, it did a little bit. Actually, I went to a couple of men. Actually, I broke down crying, which you're never supposed to do that. But I was really
upset. Why not? You were being yourself.
Yeah, I was.
And isn't it Beth being Beth that made you successful?
Absolutely, and I think so much of it is because I had an opinion. So with clients or with people or potential clients, I had an opinion. Here's what you should do. Here's what you're good at. Here's what's wrong with the situation you just come out on. And also having hard conversations with people I represent and people I work with is here's why you're holding yourself back. I think that's so much of it, and that's not just with women; it's men too. So I know more insecure men than I do women, actually. So it just happens. So when you have a strong opinion, other people around you will either rise to the occasion or take you on or whatever it is, or they'll be intimidated by it. So
Noreena, you want to weigh in?
Yes, I mean, well, I published my first kind of big book when I was 30 years old, and it was a very controversial book. It was all about big multinational companies becoming more powerful than business. This was about 15 years ago, and it was, you know, championed by some people and really attacked by others, which is fine because it was a big ideas book and you want people having a debate. But I really learned about myself that I didn't care. Like, when those people were attacking me, who were always old men, I mean, always grey old men, especially in my field. I'm an economics professor. Less than 10% of professors in economics are women. So it's going to be these old grey men in grey suits, and, you know, and I would be dressed like this, doing, you know, having a serious conversation, and the attacks were really quite astonishing. You know, I would have reviews of my book by some kind of right-wing critics, which were around my miniskirts and my shoes rather than the ideas. And I just thought, God, if that is all they can say, if that is where their attack is, like they can't even attack me on my ideas, you know, I must have done really well here and my ideas must be really strong. So I think, you know, I'm kind of probably more with you perhaps on this than with you, because I think we've got to be willing at times to not be liked. I think that's okay. I mean, in my career, I have frequently pushed myself in ways, you know, that maybe were aggressive. I remember when I was working in investment banking early on in my career, and doing this big Russia deal, and and the guy who I was working for, the head of M&A, kind of pitched to the client this big project. He said, "Yeah, let's do it," and I knew that "let's do it" meant that I would be the person doing it. So I came out of that meeting, and my boss was really excited, and he said, "Great, we landed this big deal." And I said, "I want double my salary." And he was like, but I knew that, you know, he had to deliver that, otherwise nobody would do the job. So I think there are times, there are moments when you can grab the moment and really go for it, and then you're raising your own personal bar at those moments, which is going to put you in good stead for kind of future life. So I'm all for at times being the aggressive one. Do it with charm. Of course, we're women. You know, we can smile. We can be, yeah, seriously, they buy it. It's kind of amazing, but they do. But you know, but I'd say, you know, go with that inner fire and that inner rebel.
But when? At what point in your career? You know, there's a lot of young women in the audience, and it's really tough to be bold and gutsy when you live in New York City and you need to make rent.
I mean, it's tough when you're in London and you need to make rent. I mean, it's...
But I'm saying, when for a young woman in her career, how can she balance, I want to be bold and I want to be gutsy, when I also need this job?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I think that there's, I think the point you're making is that there are times when you're, you know, firmly ensconced in work. And look, it's funny. I would never be accused of being a lilting violet myself personally, so I'm definitely not advocating for women to kind of step aside and not be aggressive for themselves and aggressive in the workplace. I just think we should recognize why it is that women aren't asking for those raises to begin with. And I think there are a lot of different issues. Let me just say, now that I'm the head of my own organization, it's 250 people. All the department heads of the organization report to me, and we do self-evaluations in the process. So people evaluate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5, and these are the top heads of the organization. You know, leaders in their own right. They're in the press all the time. They go on TV all the time. You know, I did a gender breakout, so I have like 12 department heads, and for almost all of the men, it's a 1 to 5 ranking on 12 criteria. 5 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. Almost all of the men gave themselves a 5 on everything. And it was just amazing, right? You're outstanding in everything you do. Now, women, I have great women leaders who are moving up. They will give themselves, on average, they'll give themselves a few 5s, a few 4s. Many will give like half of 3s, you know, and you know, and they're the best leaders in Washington. And I think they do that because they think that it's important to be self-critical or honest, whereas the men are like, this is a negotiation right here. The more, if I put a 5 on here, and then I do my own ranking, I do the ranking after them. So I'm doing it I'm looking at their ranking, and the farther I am, the more obvious the difficult the conversation's going to be. So it's a smart strategy to give yourself high rankings.
So should women inflate their numbers?
You know, I think we should get into a place. So what I did as the leader of the organization, I asked, when the men did this, I asked them, I think the standard should be accuracy for the organization. So I asked them, why did you list yourself outstanding at everything, right? And that's a hard, I mean, really, when you have to answer that question, even a man is going to sound like a jerk, right? in his answer. So I think the thing is, like, I think the challenge is that there are whole ways people are constantly negotiating themselves and strategizing. And I think it would be great if workplaces were actually just more accurate and it wasn't a constant negotiation. But I think as a leader of an organization, it's important for me, and I think I'm sensitive to this as a woman leader, to make sure that our rules don't work to disfavor women who are trying to be accurate. And I think there is a difference with women leaders in organizations, and I think it's important to encourage that and mentor, and that's why I spend so much time mentoring other women as well.
Noreena, how did you have the guts to go outside of working in investment banking, in large organizations, to say, I'm going to go out on my own? I mean, that takes a lot of guts to do that.
Well, it helped that I grew up in an arch-feminist home. I mean, it helped that I grew up in a home where I had an entrepreneurial mother. So my mother died when I was 20, but I had this kind of role model behind me. So I'm sure that helped. But just kind of picking up on what you were saying, there are some things that I just wanted to kind of share that I came across in my research for my new book that I think are really useful kind of tips for us. I mean, one thing that I discovered was that when we hear an expert speak, they've done brain scans of people when they hear experts speak, and it's as if the independent decision-making part of our brains switches off, and they just trust what experts say, whether they're right or wrong. So, I mean, I'd say, act as if, act as if you are that expert, because surprisingly, that really can make a really big difference. I think another thing that I learned that I found really interesting was the way that our emotions really play a part in it, more than I had realized in the decisions we make. So if you're having a negotiation with your boss, and and he is being really quite mean, it's really important to just kind of note, I'm feeling really stressed because he's being really rude to me, because just that act itself seems to serve as an emotional thermostat and regulates us, because otherwise when we're stressed and we're anxious and feeling vulnerable, that's when we make really bad decisions for ourselves, because we could become very tunnel visioned, we don't see all the options that there are, we actually kind of become underconfident in those situations and ask for less. So there's some kind of little things that we can do, take that pause, which really makes a big difference, and then kind of sleep. President Clinton says that the worst decisions he ever made were when he didn't get enough sleep. And again, the research on sleep, if you pull an all-nighter or you go a week without, with just 4 or 5 hours sleep, it's as if you're making decisions drunk. So if you've got a negotiation to make, some basic things like getting enough sleep, because when they look at what happens to our brains when we don't get enough sleep, again, it makes you much more risk-averse, it makes you, and much more and overconfident at the same time. So 2 qualities you don't want when you're negotiating. So there's kind of a lot that we can do to prep ourselves, I think, to be better negotiators. But also the research shows that we do better if we have a woman negotiating for us. Have you seen the research on
a woman negotiating for you?
Women agents. Yeah, specifically, there's some really good research on that. Women apparently are better than men at negotiating for other people.
How about when you're negotiating with a woman? Is there a difference when a woman employee is negotiating with a woman boss versus a male boss?
I've been lucky. I've had really good women bosses and really male bosses. So I haven't seen research on it, and I haven't in my life had a particularly different experience. I don't know if the others have.
Beth, you negotiate for a living. when you think you're I want to say competitor or adversary, in general, would you say women are more difficult to negotiate with or men?
I think women have more tricks up their sleeve, so especially with other women, and I think it's more time consuming.
Tricks how? What do you mean by that?
Well, it's more time consuming to negotiate with other women because you can be very quick and cut and dried in situations with men, I think, whereas women have to have the girly thing that we kind of get through first. So, and we're also better at sizing each other up, I think. So, I think it really just depends on the woman or the man. I mean, I know really good negotiators. There are people who run business affairs at studios who are women. There's some who are men, and I think for the people who've been doing it for a long time, I don't see a big gender difference. If they're really experienced. So I think that women are good negotiators because we understand that the deal is just a small part of it. So much of it is putting yourself in the situation to make the best deal. Is what's the timing, reading the emotional tea leaves. I mean, to me that's everything. Is who's the other person? What are they thinking? What do they need to do? How are you helping them go back to the
But does that mean that women overthink it? In general, if women have a higher emotional IQ, does that mean they can't leave it on the table? They harp on things and take things more personally than their male counterparts do.
Maybe some women do. I haven't really found that with me because maybe just because I've been doing it for so long and because I'm negotiating between two sides, because I'm negotiating between my client, between the person I'm negotiating with on behalf of the client, because so much of it is expectations on both sides and knowing what each side wants and needs. So my harder negotiations are with my clients usually. So
because they're delusional?
Sometimes.
No, but a lot of us are.
Sometimes what they want is unrealistic because they also have their artist temperament, and directors especially are asking people to spend millions and millions of dollars executing their vision. It's most artists can afford their own materials, at least to more of an extent than film directors.
Beth, you are a professional negotiator. Oftentimes, we don't ask for everything that we want. We don't overshoot because we think, my God, what if my potential employer thinks, this woman's a nightmare, she wants everything. How often do you see, it could be a studio, it could be a director, when you go to them, how often do they say, what you're asking for is so much, because of that, I don't even want to work with you to begin with? Because I think in general, women don't always ask for all the things that we want because we're afraid. We're afraid people are going to think we're these, uber divas who want the world. Does any potential employer, potential partner say, you know what, you're such a handful, you're such a headache, I don't want you to begin with?
You're talking about buyers? A lot of times they won't go to people based on their reputation. So, or if the easiest thing is directors who've had budgets go over multiple times. So then the deal has a punitive aspect. If this happens again, then it's going to cost them money, for instance. So there's that. A lot of times, I wouldn't really be in a financial negotiation if there were those kind of issues, because they would have had to work out the working together part, the creative part of it sort of first. But I think in terms of overshooting, sometimes I'll say to clients, no, leave it with me, here's what you should get, here's what other people are getting. So much of it is they don't want to be out, they don't want to be taken advantage of, and they want to ask for what's appropriate given their level in the business, and they just kind of trust me for that. So so much of it, almost all negotiation is about knowing your audience on both sides. Like, what's the reaction going to be on the other side? What are their expectations? What's an outrageous ask? What's a medium ask? And sometimes you're dealing with somebody who you have to ask for way more because they love the tussle. Sometimes you're with somebody, and I love these kind of people, who are the cut to the chase types, which is, here's what's fair, here's the range, you come back. And a lot of negotiations become about fine-tuning, especially profit participation, running numbers, running projections. A lot of it just is kind of grinding it out, I suppose.
But for women here who don't necessarily work in industries where they have representation, what do you do when it is opaque? When you don't know what your colleagues get paid, what your competition at other companies get paid? How do you even know how to go into the negotiation? Because, you come from finance. For many women, and I hate to say it, in finance, deep down inside, even when they're not getting paid what they should get paid, they're still blown away that it's a whole lot more money than they ever thought they were going to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, I mean, I appreciate, especially in England, we have much less of a culture of disclosing what you earn than you have here in America. I mean, it's really, people do not talk about what they earn. I mean, I found in my experience in the States, people are more open. But even in the UK, if you can, if it's a job that matters to you, I mean, I think you can research it. You can ask people. You can get some sort of parameters, because I think you're right. You don't want to be asking for $500,000 a year and then actually the going rate is $50,000 a year for that job. I mean, that's going to be pitching you way too high. But there is this concept in economics called anchoring. And they've done a lot of research to show that when people hear a number, then they subconsciously anchor their response around that number. So they've done an experiment where people are asked the last two numbers of their social security number, and then they're asked to bid for things in an auction, like a painting or a vase or something like that. And people will anchor that bid around that completely unrelated number, the last two digits of their social security number. It's why real estate agents will often show you the most expensive property first, so that everything else seems cheap in comparison, because you're kind of comparing it. So, you can, once have a sense of the parameters, you can push it to just slightly even above the top, I would say, can be a strategy, so that that's in their head. You're not actually going to get that, but you have a sense that you're asking more rather than less. I made a terrible mistake. One of my first negotiations for myself, I was just out of college, and I went to work for this woman, actually, and she, as a consultant, she said, "What is your day rate?" And I said, "My day rate is between $100 and $200 a day." And she said, "Fine, I'll pay you $100." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you don't want to do that." So I learned from that. So I'd say kind of, but using a number so that you can anchor it just at the top end, I think is a useful strategy.
All right, I'm getting to wrap it up.
Also, one thing, don't say a number and then stop talking. Don't talk them out of it. I think we all tend to say too much. Well, I'm thinking about this, but blah, blah, blah. And then the second you start that you continue the sentence, you've already lost, because then they know where you're vulnerable. Anyway.
All right. We're getting the hook. I don't know how to negotiate for more time, so we have to leave it. Noreena, Neera, Beth, thank you so much. Great conversation.